One thing about being your own owner and entrepreneur is you have a lot of great ideas. You have a lot of great reasons of why you want to be in business, create a unique business, and ultimately to take care of a customer, whether that is a patient, other healthcare professionals. But in order to be successful, you realize you can't do it alone. Unless you are your own private consultant, even a private consultant is still going to eventually, if you grow, going to need assistance to help with scheduling, reports. And so, what we're going to talk today about is putting together a team, how to tips for hiring and keeping employees. And then I'll also, at the end of this lecture, share with you some resources I'd like you to review on being able to do that. Now, one of the things that in the years of when I was director of Mission Pharmacy, a long-term care pharmacy, is the thing that I learned over my 6 years of being the director was it was not always easy finding the right person. And currently, in my current position with the two pharmacies that I work with, I still get involved with helping with the selection and hiring of the person. Because hiring the right person for the right job is so important, not only to get the job right, but also it takes time to train that person. And if you hire the wrong person to begin with, and is no matter how hard you train, that fit isn't right, you've wasted their time, you've wasted your resources, and you've wasted your financial resources in doing that. So you want to be able to hire the right person for the right job, making that perfect fit. Because not everybody's created equal. And if you even look at pharmacists, not every pharmacist is created equal. Some are very good clinically thinking. Some are very good task oriented thinking. Some are very good at working with other healthcare professionals. Some have better bedside patient manner working with patients. And so you want to be able to determine what is that job, and we're going to talk about job descriptions a little bit later. And like I said before, hiring and retaining a good employee is probably the most critical factor in a successful business. And it's been reported the average cost for an employee mishire can be up to 15 times the base salary. So, like I said, you probably in your lifetime initially before you hopefully pursue your dream of having your own business will probably go through maybe one or two different type of jobs. But every time you're hired and somebody has to rehire somebody, it does take time, effort, and money. So there's several different stages of getting that right employee. The first stage is the position description. One of the things that frustrates most employees and frustrates where failure is if you don't have an adequate job description to let that employee know right up front, what is my role? What will I be doing? Because obviously, job position description, you want to be able to say to yourself, what is the goal of this position? What type of person do we hope to fulfill this position? And what is this person going to do? And that can go from your technician to the clerk who's going to wait on your customers to your delivery driver. Some things are probably going to have commonality in them, such as you want somebody obviously always hardworking, somebody that might be able to think on their feet, somebody that's very customer patient satisfaction. The other thing is recruitment. I'm gonna sound like the old man in my day. Recruitment pretty much happened by putting an ad in the one ads in a newspaper, and obviously, as you are probably currently thinking about next year of pursuing jobs, you probably talk to upperclassmen and know that there's job fairs, there's website postings, there's different organizations that post jobs, and so recruitment is so important because when you want to pick the person for the right job, you just don't want to interview one person. You'd like to be able to interview at least multiple people so you have a selection. The other thing is the screening process. What if you get numerous applications? What if you are hiring a position and you get over 10 to 20 applications? Obviously, for every interview is going to take time and effort to set aside time to be able to interview that person. And so there should be a screening process of, and that comes down to your position description as what is the base job requirements? What is the base experience that you're looking for? What is the base education level you're looking for? What are those? And then the interviewing. The interviewing is where you get to know the person. You get to ask those key questions. And obviously, interviewing is sort of like dating. When somebody interviews, they're going to be on their best behavior. They're going to, but at the same time, you want to make the interview process very good that you can find out the person's thought process, how they answer a question, how they think out a question. And the other thing in the interview process, you usually want to have more than one person besides yourself doing the interviewing because you want to be able to get different point of views, different perspectives when somebody's interviewing. The other one I think is so important that a lot of times gets skipped and employers end up paying for this is reference checking. That you want to be able to reference check and ask those people that they've prior worked for or somebody that was a former teacher of what they thought of this person. What are the key things that made them strong? What are the key things that made them weak? And then obviously the hiring. All right. One of the things that I always look at hiring is when can they start? But at the same time, if they have a current job, I look at their professionalism. If they tell me they're working for somebody and they can start today, I kind of step back and think about, well, why is that? Is this person technically being let go, or is this person just being unprofessional and not wanting to give their employer an adequate 2 weeks notice at least for leaving? So, the hiring is that. And sometimes in the hiring may come to salary negotiations. What is the base you're willing to pay an employee? And do you have wiggle room of how high you're willing to go up? Possibly maybe the hiring too is comes down to the job description. Somebody might tell you, well, I can only work weekdays, I can't work weekends. And sometimes when you go to hire somebody, things that should have came out in the interview, things that should have been laid out based on the job description, and then that fails. And so that's why I said it's so important to follow these 8 steps. And then the final thing is employee orientation and training. Usually the best type of hiring is you give a 90-day you know period where this is where we train you, orient you, and in those 90 days we're going to reevaluate you. And there is the potential if it doesn't work out in 90 days we let you go. And in my experience, that has been very helpful. One, it's being able to help turn employees around, being able to identify where we might not have trained them properly, and it's been also a way that you can part ways, amicably, that there's hopefully no hard feelings. And in my time period, there are periods where I've actually hired, 2 pharmacists in my lifetime where I had to let them go within 90 days because they just weren't the right person for the job, and it was a choice on ours. But a lot of that came back. We didn't follow those initial steps. So let's look at these position descriptions. One of the things that I did post to you, there is a Word document that gives you several different links, and one of those links is about writing job descriptions and the benefits of writing a job description. And if you become a community pharmacy, a traditional community pharmacy business, and you apply for Medicare accreditation, Medicare actually requires that you have job description listings. But the benefits of them are the following. One, employees understand what their job is, what their assigned tasks is, what their duties are, what they'll be doing on a daily basis. It's also legal support for hiring or not hiring an employee, so that you're not going to come, possibly a lawsuit back for, age discrimination or, other types of equal opportunities that you did not hire them for that. You hired them because they didn't meet the requirements of the job description. So the job description is so important. You know, the other thing too is job descriptions help lay out, what the person is going to be compensated. What's the promotion process. Um, the other thing, the job description, also helps you go back when things aren't working out right and you may have to discipline somebody or terminate them because they weren't meeting the requirements of the job. The other thing in a job description, and you need to check, the other thing when you are writing job descriptions, you need to check with your state laws. But like for example, Pennsylvania is an at-will work state, which basically it helps protect the employer from wrongful termination suits. And so, basically we're an at-will work state. And so technically you can let somebody go for any reason. However, I caution you with, even though we can let somebody go at every reason, a job description is so important because you better have due cause for letting go of that employee and making sure there's no type of discrimination lawsuit that could come against you for letting them go. There are different softwares out there. An example one is called the Ultimate Manager software that helps you make you write job descriptions, simply. There's lots of different online web sources, and to help with writing job descriptions, I would probably Google, several different job descriptions of a type of that you're looking for and do your research in writing that. But like I said, first off, you want to be able to find the right job description. The other thing is, a lot of times what happens is, when somebody leaves or we finally realize there's a need for a new job, we all of a sudden say, okay, now we got to have it. What I always say is one of the purposes of your business plan is you write out, you know, the operations and procedures, and you write out the job descriptions because you always want to be recruiting. All right, because what happens when maybe an employee decides to retire, an employee decides to lead, you want to have maybe a good pool of candidates that you may be able to go to. And so, places that you can also use for recruiting are, you know, maybe one of the things you'll do, maybe an internal posting. Sometimes the best pharmacy technicians start out being the best pharmacy clerk. Sometimes the best, pharmacy manager comes from within a pharmacist who's worked there for a long time. Obviously, pharmacy schools is a great place to recruit, for both pharmacists and pharmacy interns. Technician certification programs is a great way to recruit for looking at newer grads. Pharmacy associations. Our state pharmacy association allows you to post job descriptions, and those job descriptions go out as an email and also is on a website. There's also job forums such as LinkedIn, monsters.com, and job fairs. And probably, you can do online. Most newspapers do now have online postings. So, but one of the things just to caution with that, depending upon what type of job you're looking for, think to yourself, where do people look for that? Most professionals use these professional websites to find jobs. There's also professional headhunters that you can hire. The only downside of that, you usually have to pay a retaining fee if you do hire that employee. But like I said, there's numerous ways to recruit. Screening tools. As I said before, as you get numerous applications, you want to determine, well, who am I going to? Couple of things within your applicants. Like I said, you want to make sure that you have an at-will statement telling them that it's your right to hire or fire or release. You also want to make sure that you have them sign a release reference check. And sometimes you may even have them sign a perjury statement. And the perjury statement is because if they do lie, find out if they lied in their interview, you have due right cause to let them go. These are important provisions on your application you want to put on there. Probably other things you need to put on your application because you are a pharmacy type of business, you're probably going to be required to do a criminal background check. So you want to know up front if they have had any criminal instances. If it's a pharmacist, have they had any times where they've had any issues against their license? Because you're going to have, somebody give you a resume, but you're going to also have them fill out an official application. And so the application is something that you should check with legal. Now, a lot of times your business may be too small to have your own human resources expert, but there's numerous companies out there, and a lot of your payroll companies will offer human resources as a service that you can hire them for. The other thing is too is remember, resumes beware. They can be artfully written descriptions. A resume is just what I like to say, the sniff test. It shows, person's, degree, their highest education level possibly, what were their job experiences. But once again, that's just, it's just a snapshot of them. A lot of things that I look on resumes, I look at time between jobs. I look at number of jobs. I looked for gaps because I want to, during the interview, I want them to explain what is that gap. And so you want to be able to do that. And so when you're reviewing your applications, your resumes, you want to separate them into three categories: strong, middle of the road, and unsuitable. And once again, the justification of where do you categorize them is based on your job description you wrote earlier. So, let's get down to the interviewing process. And this is a good process. One of the things that I posted as a link is good interview questions to ask. And I think that's also important for you as you are entering in looking for a job next year. All right. Some of the ineffective interviewing and some of the failures is not time, the candidate did not spend enough time analyzing the job. And so the other thing is, I always look at, did the candidate actually do research on us as a company? If I find a candidate who doesn't ask me enough questions, I think that they may not be interested. Sometimes, one of the things in your interview process, you want to talk, but you want your applicant to do most of the talking. So the applicant should dominate 80% of the interview time. And the other thing during that interview process, it is a snapshot. And like I said, it's like the first date. All right, and it doesn't always tell you everything, but a lot of times use your gut feeling. Okay? Because as I said before, wrong hiring decisions are costly. And then the other one is, do not fall into the trap of you interview the first person and they think that they're great, but you want to make sure you interview more than one applicant. And you want to let that person know when you're done with the interviewing, saying that, you know what, we are entering numerous applicants. There is a time, we have a timeline. And then also ask them their timeline is, during your timeline, what is your timeline looking for a job like this? Because you also don't want to lose that possible applicant, and so you want to make sure that you follow up with them if they show interest. Okay, so making sure you follow all the steps. Keys to effective interviewing: describe the job, describe what they would be doing. Okay, identification of the key functions for the right candidate. So you may describe the job to them and say, how would you handle that job? Prepare questions ahead of time. Stay consistent with each candidate, because if you're going to compare candidates, you want to see how they answered the same questions. The other thing is, have a rating sheet for yourself internally: strong, medium, weak. Keep it simple, not complicated. You may have things such as answered questions effectively, personality, enthusiastic, good thought process. All right. And then the other one, a lot of times I strongly, is that if you do narrow down the field, call back for a second interview after the initial contact. And that second interview might be that they're interviewed by another person within your organization, because you want to get multiple opinions on this. Make sure that you review the applicant's file ahead of the interview. Nothing's worse is that the applicant comes in and you start to interview them and say, you know what, I didn't have time to read your resume. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because you want to be able to pick apart and say, hey, I see you went to this college. What was your most challenging experience while you were in school? I see you worked for this company. What's your most challenging experience in this company? And make sure that your partners or who else is going to be interviewing do that. I had numerous times where a couple of my partners would come into an interview and I gave them the applications ahead of time and they didn't read them. And actually, sometimes I think we might have lost opportunities with candidates because they looked at us and say, well, you don't seem really interested in me. You didn't even prepare to read my resume. All right. And so, like I said, also have another key member of your business sit on the interview. If you're worrying about possible sexual discriminations or anything like that, making sure that you have both male and female in the room when the applicant is either male or female to make sure that that doesn't occur. Like I said, those are key things to think about during the interview process. Here's some sampling interview questions you want to, that you would probably want to say is, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your educational background. Provide me a brief summation of your professional experience. Why did you choose this career? Why are you seeking a position with our business? What do you know about our business? What is your perception of a typical day? Now that we've gone over the job description, what do you feel that your role is? What do you think are some of the challenges of this role? What makes you unique for applying for this? Tell me about your most significant professional accomplishment. Why did you leave your last position? Have you ever been fired or forced to leave your position? Maybe ask them scenarios. How do you handle a difficult customer? How do you handle conflict? How do you work with other technicians who are having a bad day? So like I said, I'm going to go over here at the end some of the links I said, but there's additional questions to think about, but those are good. But let's talk about questions to avoid and not to get you in trouble. There is the link for the Equal Opportunity website. One of the things you want to check the rules and laws, all right? But once again, the federal law declares that employers cannot discriminate among job applicants based on age, sex, race, religion, physical handicap, nationality, and sexual orientation. These are, showing all the different acts and laws that are out there. Like I said, you want to check with your, state based on those laws. You also, realize, there's the Family Medical Leave Act. You can't ask a female, are you thinking about getting pregnant? You can't ask those questions. And so things that you have to avoid answering is how old you are. What is your marital status? What is the age of your children? Do you plan on having children? Do you have any physical limitations? Now, if the applicant brings those, to the forefront, you can't really probe further deeper. You may say, the person says, well, we just recently moved here, my husband or I, or my wife and I, and you may say, oh, that's great, I'm married too. You can do chit chat, but that cannot be part of the interview process. All right. Do's and don'ts in question the applicant. All right. Here's some things that are acceptable and unacceptable. Acceptable. What days can you work? What hours can you work? Unacceptable. How many children do you have? Do you have a babysitter available? Acceptable. Are you legally eligible to work in the United States? And that actually should be one of the things on your application is, are you a U.S. citizen, or not? And if they're not a U.S. citizen, you want to see status of their green card. Acceptable. This job requires someone who speaks more than one language. What language do you speak or write fluently? You can't ask them what their native language is. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Unacceptable. Have you ever been arrested? Acceptable. Do you have a high school diploma? Do you have a university or college degree? You can't ask them when they graduate. Now, the applicant may let you know that based on the resume. They may post that, but you cannot ask those questions. And so, like I said, you want to be able to find out about your applicant, but there are key things that are taboo based upon the Equal Opportunity Act. The final thing, as I said, is the reference checking. It's important to make an effort, all right? It gains insight information to the applicants based on their previous experience. It protects you from negligent hiring suits. All right. But you have to get approval for the reference check. They have to apply the references. You can't say, "Oh, I see they work for so and I know so and so." You can't call that person up and say, "Hey," even though they didn't put them on as a reference. All right. If you are Medicare accredited, as I said before, it's required that you do a criminal background check. All right. And, the Attorney General's office requires you do yearly checks on people with professional licenses. And so that's there. If you have in your, work policy about drug testing, then, you have to, you have to have that written beforehand. You can't just randomly come back to them and say, "Hey, I need to do a drug test." All right. So let's talk about the hiring. All right. If you're going to make the hiring, all right, one of the things, like I said, in the interview process, say, "Well, we're looking at hiring in the next month. If I would hire you, when would probably the soonest that you could start?" You want to offer them in writing, all right, what their base salary would be, all right, and then you want to review your hiring checklist of when you're going to train them. When does their benefits kick in? When is their vacation? What is their vacation policy? Go over their vacation policy. How many vacation days did they get that year? Is there, lockout periods of when they're not allowed to take vacation? You want to make sure, and that's why that should be written in your employee handbook. That's another thing I didn't talk about. Is one of the other things that you want to have is you want to have an employee handbook, and your employee handbook is going to talk about how you discipline employee, how you hire employees, how you terminate employees, how vacation days. And so those are one of the other things is that obviously in a small company a lot of times you're not going to be able to hire a human resource person full time, but you want to be able to take a look at those things. If you're hiring a minor, obviously you want to make sure that they have a work permit, a copy of their active driver's license. The other thing is, if you end up not hiring somebody, I think this is so important, and I think this is so professional too, is if you do not hire somebody, you want to put out a letter to them letting them know that thank you for your time, but, based on selection process, you weren't, we went and hired somebody else. And the reason why is you don't want to burn bridges. Maybe you had three great applicants. It was a tough decision. But what if another job opportunity comes up in your company? You want to let that too. And like I said, during the hiring process, this is once you want to orient them to your employee orientation and to their handbook. And then the other key one is retention, because once again, if we fail in retaining our employees and training them properly, we've, like I said before, it could be costly. It could be 15 times that base salary. So when you're training, you want to identify the skills that are lacking in your new hire. You want to make sure you motivate and familiarize the employees to the new skill. Sure, employees have the basic skills required to learn the new skill. That should happen during the interview process. You want to teach specific skills to the standard task. Arrange that the employee can actually start working within that new skill, right away. Provide communication, constructive criticism, praise. And because it's been shown for employees, the greatest single job satisfaction is being appreciated for what they do. And it's been shown numerous times it ranks ahead of working conditions and salary. An employee that is publicly or privately appreciated for doing a good job will work harder for less compensation. So like I said, also too, the job description, letting that employee know right ahead of time, what is my roles and responsibilities? And that goes back to your current employees. And like I said, probably the most frustrating thing, and then probably you may have experienced it, of people not pulling their own weight, people not knowing what they're supposed to do, and or people being reprimanded for something that they weren't aware that that was their job. All right. Obviously, we want to do. It's required that we should do annual employee reviews. But for new hires, what you do is you usually do the 90-day review, and that is your temp review. And that is usually what you let them know is this is a 90-day temp process we have within our company, and because that is a possibility of the time that if in 3 months it doesn't work out, there's the opportunity that you may be able to let that employee go if it doesn't. You hope that doesn't happen there. Once again, it is required that employee reviews, and actually under Medicare, should happen annually. It's also required under Medicare if an employee leaves that you need to do an exit interview of why they're leaving, and if there was any reasons that caused them to leave. Information on the employee review should be in the employee handbook. It, for example, states when it occurs. It may occur every 12 months from the date of hire. You may also do a 90-day review from the date of hire. Review also will be face to face and needs to be a written document the employee and the evaluator sign for a permanent record. So when you do the review, you may tell them what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and a copy should be given to the employee. The other thing is, if you have to reprimand an employee for something of significance, that should be actually a face to face, and that should be written up and put into the employer, so that if somewhere down the road you need to terminate that employee, that both the employee and the employer know what has happened in the past, and that is in writing. The hardest one is firing. Now, in my lifetime, I have had to let go of a pharmacist, I've had to let go of a technician, I've had to let go of a driver for our company that I worked with, and it was never easy. And a lot of reasons you have to ask yourself, why is the reason for termination? Obviously, there's some easy ones, such as theft, you know, you know, a criminal act that might have been possibly done with by the employee. But a lot of times, in my case, the three that I let go is they just weren't meeting what the job requirements were, and there was also conflict within that. And so you have to ask yourself a few questions. Is the employee clear on their job duties and company regulations? Have we trained them appropriately? Is the employee underachieving because they aren't challenged enough or it's too demanding? Sometimes you might find out instead of terminating an employee, maybe they're a right fit for another position within your company. Is there a conflict with coworkers or immediate supervisor? Sometimes it may be just that type of resolution. Are personal problems interfering with employees' ability to do the job? Different things happen to us in life, and it's not always easy. I try to tell employees that, use the job as the place to shut off your personal life. When we come in and hang our hat and we hang our coat, this is where we shut our personal life off and we get to work. But sometimes that's not always easy. There might be a death in the family. There might be, trouble with their child at home. But you want to resolute of what are those issues. If there's no if none of the above are the reasons, and none of the above reasons can be resolved, then it's probably a good idea to cut your losses and terminate this person. But you want to terminate this person based on they were not being able to perform, to the job of descriptions. Steps you should do, though, before termination to make sure you don't get a wrongful lawsuit is you should investigate the employee. Think of questions from the previous slide. You should review the employee's personal file. Is there documentation of poor work performance, attitude? And that is why it's so important to do annual reviews. That's why it's so important, as I said before, to put down in writing if you have to discipline an employee. Were there things such as tardiness, excessive calling off? Consider what your employee was told verbally. Consider the context of this potential firing. What will happen? Is there going to be backlash? What will other employees think about? How are you going to cover the shifts once you let that employee go? And consider your options. Do not take firing lightly. All right. Also, may you want to check with your attorney before you fire this employee to make sure that there's no possibility of wrongful termination. All right. And you want to properly plan how you're going to do that. Okay. And usually I recommend that if you're going to terminate an employee, you either do it at the very beginning of the day or the very end of the day to make it an easy transition. I did post for you several links. That these are links to interview questions, links to written job description, and there's a job interview video. And so, like I said, one is hiring tips from a recent, a couple years ago, conference on how to hire employees. This is an article written from Inc. magazine, which Inc. magazine is a very good reference, just FYI, to read about for entrepreneurs. So this is one talking about writing job descriptions. And then I actually have two on one, how to find the perfect employee by using a good pharmacy job interview techniques. All right. Talks about a lot of the other tips we already talked about, preparing yourself well in advance, set the agenda of what you want to know. All right. Know what you want to ask. Use trigger words to draw things out of people, especially their size, such as what, why, and help me understand. And at the interview, capture thoughts on paper why they're still fresh after they leave you leave the interview with them. The other one are some questions. Find out the last place your candidate worked and chronological and find out details about each job. Ask how their former bosses would rate them. Ask the candidate what they would rate as their biggest accomplishment and find out about those. Have the candidate describe the team at their last three jobs and how or she fit in and what was their role. Think about problems you have in your pharmacy, such as difficult customers, and ask the candidate how they would deal with those. So one of the things is using problem-solving questions to find out how does your possible applicant thinks, what are their biggest weaknesses professionally, and what have they done to overcome these. Now, one of the things a lot of times is people will just say, "Well, my biggest weakness is I work too hard. I put too much time in my work." And so you want to make sure that you ask the question in the right way, that you're going to get the answer that you're looking for. Because not a lot of times nobody wants to answer. Okay. And then you may ask them simple questions. What is a misconception people may have about you, and how did you overcome this? All right. So you want to see, how does the candidate perceive themselves? Okay. So we went over several different questions and about hiring and recruiting, employee. Once again, this is usually an on-the-job experience. This is usually years of getting to know people. One of the things that I've learned, that if you respect people, they respect you. The other thing is, if you let people know what they're expected to do, that is the most successful. The other one is, I'm a firm believer in, reward people when they do a good job, but also when they're not doing a good job. You don't have to scream and holler and hoot, but you need to let them know when they're not doing a good job. And it's your job as a manager to make sure that they get trained on how you want them to do that job. Just assuming, we all know what the first three letters of assume are, that we don't want, us as a manager to be looked at, well, that manager just always yells at me when I do something wrong. They never do that. You want to be, a team builder, because you want your team, because you can't be able to do everything. And then the other important thing as a manager and as an owner is being able to trust your employees and delegate responsibilities to your employees. A lot of times you always hear the term micromanager, is if you don't allow your employees to do what they're supposed to do. And what happens a lot of times, what's going to happen the day when you can't be there, or the day you have to be off, or the day you want to go on vacation? You want to make sure that you put yourself and your employees in the best position to succeed. Okay?